4. Welcome back to the library. I am the recorder, and in today's entry we are going to cover one of the many wonders of the Teltechians, those refugee humans from a faraway galaxy. A technology that both demonstrates the vast store of Teltechian scientific knowledge as well as technical ability in its ability to overcome nearly any defense or armor. In today's entry of Intro to the Realms, we are going to look at the Teltechian Nominally Expected Resonance Frequency, or N.E.R.F technology. Perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and of course, new guests of the library. We will begin this discussion with a quick look at the origins of the technology as not a weapon, but as a tool in Teltechian mining operations. Then, we're going to cover how it is now used in various weapons, from its limited implementation in man-portable systems, to the vastly more complex and effective systems that are seen in use on spaceships or other similarly sized constructions. According to the limited records that have endured from the Teltechians' history before their flight to our galaxy from their own, this technology was first developed as a mining tool for zero-G environments. Utilizing a series of specialized sensors, the material makeup of an asteroid or other stellar object would be determined, and by cross-referencing this data against the massive database of information, calculate a proper series of energy frequencies that then could be projected as a coherent beam to destabilize and weaken the target by causing its surface to vibrate along the molecular structural level in a disruptive and destructive manner. Following applications of force, typically via a kinetic impact projector, or KIP, would then prove far more effective, allowing the extraction and sifting of valuable matter and materials from lesser materials with much greater speed and efficiency. Repeated or continuous blasts would increase the effect, eventually resulting in the target section of rock, ice, or other similar layer of an asteroid or meteor shaking itself apart, often leaving masses of valuable minerals or other resources intact. The only downside of this was the lengthy calculations and scans required before the system could be used, something that mattered little to the space miners, as it was ultimately safer and far more profitable in the end once adjustments were made to account for this quirk of the technology. Key to this system was the vast array of scientific data that allowed for the calculation of frequencies to be used. The Teltechians were already a vast interstellar force at this point, and were beginning to enter their golden age. Their archives were brimming with information on every discovery their people had made in their long history up until that point. As time went on, more efficient methods of reference and calculation were developed, with specialized processing systems designed to be able to extrapolate and calculate N.E.R.F sequences based on less precise scanning criteria, as well as for newly encountered alloys, composites, or altogether new materials. More importantly, the process would take hours at most, compared to the days or weeks that it previously took. Even with these improvements, the size of the new processor systems, as well as their power requirements, ensured that only the larger mining vessels could install and take advantage of these innovations. Distribution of calculated N.E.R.F sequences to other mining vessels in the fleet via hard-coded physical matrices meant that while N.E.R.F processor systems could only be installed on a larger vessel, only one such vessel required it for the entire fleet to reap the benefits. At some later point, experimentation, with the goal of applying this technology to military use, began. The earliest versions appeared to be large siege engines or other forms of heavy, terrestrial anti-fortification construct, where the ability to determine the material makeup of walls or other constructions was relatively reliable. making allowances for the system to only require a lesser version of the processor, one limited to known local materials of a planet or region. Of course, even this was space-intensive, requiring the weapons to be large and thus an easy target if not properly protected. The results, however, were clearly worth the challenges, with entire curtain walls brought crumbling down under their own weight with the application of only 1 or 2 blasts from these early versions. Following the success of these first attempts, and the resultant advances in defensive technology created to counter this new weapon, expanding the weapon's function to be able to perform similar feats on energy constructs, such as shields or other defensive fields, became the priority. This, of course, required an entirely new set of databases and processing systems to be developed, which again made the system larger, even with advances in optimization and other shortcuts figured out this far in its development. Initially able only to be placed in a permanent physical base or a starship, these newer weapons proved very effective on both shields of enemy vessels and vehicles, causing them to be shorted out or otherwise bypassed, as well as the hulls, as material compositions for most mass-produced craft were generally uniform within a particular variance, based on region, maker, and user. Once confirmed by scans, this information allowed for the use of pre-programmed sequences, as opposed to recalculating for every use of the weapon. Similar patterns in defensive technology were soon identified that allowed these presets to be used for energy constructs as well. However, ultimately it was but one of the myriad technological wonders the Teltechians had, and with how space-intensive the system had to be to provide full adaptive functionality, combined with the relatively short range of the projected beam relative to the power investment required, this saw the N.E.R.F technology relegated to a niche role for use in breaching actions or siege scenarios where the range of materials were limited and hopefully well known beforehand, allowing for the use of pre-programmed sequences in those devices. It wasn't until later developments in augmentative energy fields that an in-depth review of the usefulness of N.E.R.F tech was conducted, and some of these shortfalls were worked on. These advances would allow for customizable energy fields to be generated and added to an already existing physical projectile, overcoming 2 of the largest hurdles to use of N.E.R.F sequences as a weapon, range and power consumption, quite neatly. While the issue of size was addressed somewhat, a fully adaptive system, able to calculate new sequences for unknown composites or alloys, was still something that could only reasonably fit on massive starships or large terrestrial constructs. However, the ability to apply N.E.R.F sequences to projectiles of varying kinds had been successfully engineered, optimized, and miniaturized to allow the use of pre-programmed ones on weapons small enough to be carried into combat by infantry, as well as to be added to nearly any other weapon system. This disconnect from the N.E.R.F processors allowed for a far wider deployment of the technology, as if a team found their weapons suddenly rendered ineffective by encountering materials or shield configurations that were outside the scope of the mission and thus the preloaded sequences, new sequences could be derived by a ship in orbit or from a base safely behind the lines, and transmitted in real time to troops in the field. Of course, the time required for the new sequences can be lengthy, especially if the encountered obstacle is particularly unique or strange. And, again, this ensured that while used on a much wider scale than ever before, N.E.R.F tech was something that ever rose to the use of a specialist or particular weapon in infantry combat, even as it became a feature on larger classes of ship, who had the room and power to fully use the system to its potential. Even on those larger ships, the space requirements and power consumption were not to be taken lightly, as the ship would also require additional specialized scanners and other augmentations and modifications to properly determine and calculate targets' makeup and the proper sequences to be used and derived. Again, this made the system a choice that was not universally accepted amongst the various captains and ship designers of the Teltechians, but one that shows up with enough regularity as to always be a reasonable concern for those that have been on the receiving end of this utterly devastating technology, or have seen the aftermath of such. Normally, only capital class vessels can be guaranteed to have a fully adaptive N.E.R.F calc core system installed. However, in smaller ships, a lesser N.E.R.F core cal processor can be present. These possess vast arrays of pre-programmed and determined N.E.R.F sequences, along with complex algorithms to attempt to correlate scans and identifications of targets with the most likely sets of sequences that will prove effective. While these core cals are still relatively large, they are vastly more compact than a full N.E.R.F calc core system, and have the added benefit of still being able to perform in-the-field updating to infantry or other forces in combat. Again, the limit is in encountering unexpected or unknown configurations and materials, where no compatible preset exists in the database. In these cases, only a calc core is capable of coming up with a solution on the fly, where the core cal will flounder trying to provide an effective sequence. Smaller, man-portable systems will only have a few sequences loaded and available for use at any time, having to switch between them as the situation requires, as well as knowing when not to use it, as using the system with a mismatch sequence will result in wasting some of the munition's damaging effect while consuming significantly more energy for the shot than could have been applied in a better way, such as for overall effect or range. Often, these systems are off by default and only activate when a match is detected via other systems. Sequences designed for particular targets coming online when the target is identified and within the sights, for example. The ability to swap out sequences for others in the field via either direct transmission from a calc core or core cal to a limited internal memory, or by swapping out physical chips with patterns hard-coded into their matrices, is what makes a system one that can be deployed with regularity possible on the personal scales, as it allows for the weapon or any modification of an existing weapon to benefit from the technology to remain reasonable for an infantryman to carry, maintain efficiency, and deploy in both size, weight, as well as its durability. And this is how we find the technology being used in the modern day in the realms, now newly challenged by the fact that unlike the galaxy from which the Teltechians originate, the realms has magic. This difference in cosmic reality complicates the entire process of calculating sequences, and limits the usefulness of the system when used against foes that employ magical defenses or reinforcement of structures or armor. Whether or not this is a gap in understanding and knowledge that can be bridged by the Teltechians, or is a set of variables that is simply beyond the technology's ability, is something that is not fully determined, as it represents only one of the many challenges the Teltechians face in this new galaxy. From its utilitarian origins in mining to the current challenges it now faces with the reality and physics-bending effects of magic, N.E.R.F tech has always been an interesting, if niche area of development, with the potential to completely swing any conflict or encounter from one side to the other, so long as the tech is properly deployed and supported with accurate information. It is an excellent showing of how advanced the Teltechian sciences are, and how they seldom leave any idea of merit on the shelf for far too long. Perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and of course, new guests of the library. I hope you have found this entry enjoyable and informative. I thank you for your time, your interest, and of course your support of Gryphon's Library and the Realms of Jam'mar. Until you make your way back to the library for another entry of Intro to the Realms, I have, as always, been the Recorder, and by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching,